Hello, mobility athletes. Welcome back. I'm not going to lie, you might not be pumped to hear all about the brain, but I am pumped, and you should stick around for our next guest, Alyssa Chang. She actually works in Brainbased health and movement coach. With the health industry currently saturating the market with quick fixes and cookie cutter approaches, she is aiming to really challenge these norms and thus challenge you. With over 8 years of studying neuroscience, she works with clients on improving their connection between their brain and body so that they can begin to heal their metabolism, rewire their mindset, and move pain-free. She really believes in partnerships with her clients and develops programs that create subtle lifestyle shifts that interrupt the seemingly never-ending searches for new solutions. Brain-based coaching is as much about movement and mobilizing joints and your recovery as it is about our emotional relationships to our bodies. I think if you are a coach for any fitness industry, you need to be listening. If you are a healthcare provider in any way, doctor, physical therapist, chiropractor, anything, like this is so important. And if you are an athlete or into fitness yourself or have dealt with pain before, like she is going to unlock things and rock your world like you've never imagined. So welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you. What an intro. I'm like so pumped to like listen, and I'm like the one getting interviewed.
Well, I love your story. I
Hmm.
love how you are bringing this to light, sharing it on a big platform for really large impact so that people can start understanding this about themselves. I think so much of the brain seems very elusive. Would you agree?
Yeah. And there's a lot of people, I think, throwing up brain-based a lot too. And it kind of gets a little, kind of like confusing, I would say, when most people are like, I don't really know what that is, but that sounds kind of cool.
So tell us about, you got your start as an athlete originally because you
Yes.
were a collegiate volleyball player. So tell us about how really all of this built for what you're creating now with really brain-based movement and coaching. How did that start and how has that been a big part of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up an athlete, like you mentioned. So I started playing volleyball when I was probably like 9 years old, like in the backyard with my dad. I'm from Hawaii, and in Hawaii, volleyball is like huge. Like the University of Hawaii volleyball team are like, they're just like celebrities there. So I always like idolize them, and I just like trained because I was like, I want to get there. And I was probably like 10, 11, and I was like 5'4", and everyone's like, wow, you're going to be so great because you're so tall already. And then I just stopped growing. So I was like, darn it, I'm in a sport where I'm not tall enough. So I had to work on developing the other skill sets, right? Be super fast, be really intelligent athlete, be resilient, be strong, jump high. And so my training kind of like evolved around everything else because I couldn't change how tall I was, and then develop the skill sets around that. So I think as athletes, right, the audience is kind of in that demographic as
Yes.
well, where we like to compete. We also identify ourselves a lot with our, physical capabilities, maybe our accomplishments. For me, after I finished, I had this window where I was like still training like an athlete, but I was like, but what for? Like I was like, oh, I'm not putting like all this super hard training to anything. And so I kind of spent like a few months just asking myself, like, I feel a little lost. I don't know what I'm doing. How should I train for my body now that I'm no longer performing as an athlete? And so I fell into, a friend actually asked me, have you heard of figure competitions? And I was like, I have no idea what that is. So I like literally went home and I like Googled figure competitors, and I was like, wow, these women look beautiful. I've never trained for an aesthetic goal. It was always like performance and resiliency. So I was like, wow, this would be hugely challenging. And as athletes, we're like, what's the hardest next thing I can do? Like, give me that. And so I was
Yes.
like, that seems really hard and challenging. Let me do that. And I mean, it was probably one of the most challenging things I experienced, not only physically, but emotionally and mentally after. So, if you've heard of figure competitors, they most likely, a lot of them do the traditional, like very low carb, very little food in general, a lot of cardio, and you just like whittle down to like this very lean physique, unsustainable, but we always think to ourselves during competition, like, oh, I'll just put back on like 5 to 10 pounds. And before you know it, your body just takes control and it starts to gain weight as like essentially a safety precaution, which we'll definitely talk about from a neuroscience lens. But, you know, being so young at that time, I had no idea. I was like, why am I'm eating so perfectly and I'm doing all the training, but why am I still gaining weight and feeling worse and worse and worse? And so I went through the whole metabolic damage journey of, you know, my body basically showing up for me, but I was not well enough educated to understand that it was doing that. I was just very frustrated with why it was doing certain things. But when I fell into neuroscience, I started to connect all these dots about why I was having certain symptoms, why my body was actually working for me, and what all of this meant, and how I could go about healing my metabolism, my pain, my body in a way that was like rooted in science and very compassionate and gentle.
When you talk about really your body working for you, I feel like even in your intro, we talked about the medical community and we talked a lot about, I think, just society in general, not even necessarily the medical community, but they've really asked us to stop listening to our bodies and like push through, get back up. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. No pain, no gain. All of these different things that are really, we talk a lot about like scarcity mindsets. So it's really about like, sometimes like less is more, talking about calorie intake or all this different stuff. And really, for some people that might work, but if you're not listening and connecting to your body, you can really create a lot of damaging results for yourself in the process.
Yeah. And, you know, as athletes, there's sometimes I wrote about this recently where there was like, for me to fit in my sport, I had to ignore pain, right? It was kind of modeled to me to like push past that. And you would be considered strong if you sprained your ankle in the middle of a match, got back up, taped it up and went back in, right? It was like this kind of psychology of like, okay, I shouldn't even listen to my body because that's going to be seen as weakness. And for a lot of us, I think in sports, right, especially team sports, you want to fit in, you want to have like a collective like community with your team members. And it was just hard because, you know, as women, it's like, you have to be tough, right? You have to like assume this kind of masculine energy that I can push as hard as the guys and do all these things. And as athletes, it's just there's a lot of unlearning that, you know, occurs later on in life after you complete, you know, or finish off your sport.
I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to really embody and train athletes. And one of the biggest things is I don't want to train the stereotypical athlete. So we shut our eyes, we envision an athlete and we see, you know, what you're talking about. So we see either aesthetics or we see college athletes or NFL athletes or these people that are pros. But I believe it's a continuum and you have to respect that continuum and listen because there's times that you're going to want to push in your life. But there's been so much interesting research that has come out that has really shown that some of these very high level athletes that we would kind of consider the top of the pyramid as far as health are really unhealthy. I mean, the start of type 2 diabetes from damage to their systems. A lot of them are addicted to pain medications because they have been pushing through that pain for so long and getting medicated, and like depression is very high, especially as people come off of their careers. And so I love what you're talking about because we're talking about respecting a whole system no matter where you're at in the health and competitive model. Like it's all one thing. You can really listen and still be super successful.
Yeah, super successful. If anything, I think like you mentioned that transition from ending your sport to making the, you know, transition to everyday living. Like imagine if you had that ongoing conversation with your body and pain and you were so well educated on what she was telling you. It's like going into not being a competitive athlete, but still just a lifestyle athlete. Like imagine how much resiliency and like, again, conversation you have with her that could create just a long-term success going down or going forward.
So let's talk about the brain. So we're
My
talking
favorite.
about a lot of like feelings and emotions, but when you talk about brain-based coaching, what are you actually talking about?
Yeah, no, I love that question because I think sometimes people think brain-based and they think mindset, right? Which is a huge component, like your limiting beliefs, your internal chatter, like all of that. But for me, the background is heavily influenced by understanding the nervous system is your governing system. And that basically it's always trying to answer the question, how safe am I? And so we have all these different lobes that are responsible for they have different responsibilities for how we're interpreting the environment around us. And we go through this whole interpretation processing as we're receiving that input and then outputting it into like awesome movement quality, super strong, or pain, depression, anxiety, gut health. So my lens is basically looking at movement, assessing movement from a brain-based lens, and going through brain-based assessments, like looking at how well your eyes move. Does your inner ear work with your eyes? How well do you breathe? How well does your cerebellum work? And your cerebellum is just a part of your nervous system that is responsible for what we call your movement ABCs, which is your ability to be accurate, balanced, coordinated, and inhibit also unwanted movement or even unwanted thoughts. So when we think about athletes who struggle with maybe like pre-game, jitters, or, like you mentioned, they move into depression or have bouts of depression.
Mm-hmm.
We could look at specific structures of the brain that may be inhibited due to injury, maybe inhibited due to lack of specific activation in those parts of the brain. And then my background is through Z Health Performance. We look at all the education, all the ways that we can create therapy from the forms of retraining your visual system, retraining your ears. Breathwork is super impactful. And then like, there's just so many things, because it's like we can look at sensory receptors, we can look at movement maps, like all of these different pieces basically create that resiliency and that whole athlete, let's say that. One component that I think a lot of people tend to resonate with is your brain basically has like movement maps and it has sensory maps. So both of these maps basically give us a better awareness of where we are, how fast we can move, where our feet are. But in many cases, when we don't move them properly or through their full range of motion, or maybe we've sprained our ankle and we didn't properly rehab it, those maps get kind of blurry. And so the way that the brain works is that when something's not used, it's kind of this use it or lose it. So we begin to create blurry movement maps or sensory maps. So we may move slower, we may have more pain, we may have more anxiousness. Because again, when the brain is constantly trying to scan, like, how safe am I, it does so via prediction. So if we cannot predict where our foot is or how our foot can move due to blurry movement maps or sensory maps, we may have a very compromised output, which could be pain, which could be, again, depression or anxiety. So my goal is to like clarify as much as I can with your maps so that you are able to better predict, move more effectively, faster, stronger, pain-free. So again, you're really that whole athlete or that whole person.
One of the biggest things that I see commonly, and it's so hard for me talking with clients, and I'll just kind of share it here, is this idea, because the consumer doesn't understand what they just don't know, what's not out there. Like, if you guys Google this, like, you're going to have to sift through some serious stuff to really get true answers. And so I will see an athlete and they'll be like, oh yeah, I've sprained my ankle probably 6 times. I tore my ACL on the right. I also have like back problems. I've also, have wrist problems. I have an ongoing shoulder injury. And they start giving me this list. And for me, automatically, it almost brings me to tears for 2 reasons. One, for that person, because they don't realize what that has done to their brain. Like, there are lifelong implications, even for simple things like an ankle sprain,
Totally.
something that we deem simple, that you go to the doctor, or you don't even go to the doctor. Like you said, you tape it back up, go back in, or you go to the doctor and they say, oh, stick it in a boot for 5 to 7 days and then you'll be good to go. But your brain changed every time something like that happens, and it's rapid and it's chaotic, and we can't even specifically say. That's why your assessment is so important, because someone could change from an ankle sprain significantly in maybe one area, like their eye tracking or something like that, and it might not affect someone else that way.
Totally.
And
yeah, pain is so uniquely personal and it's interpreted by all of our brains so individually that like an ankle sprain could be taped back up and and go back into a match, while other people sprain their ankle, they get a fever, they have to be rushed to the ER.
yeah.
They start going into like all these different, like very serious kind of like, again, the brain interpreted that ankle sprain as this is life threatening to me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to increase your fever. So you have to go X, Y, and Z, right? Because pain conceptually is an action signal. It's your brain telling you, stop and address something because I feel very unsafe.
Yeah. But I also think, which we can kind of dive into the two realms, but also for me on the other end, they will talk about seeing other professionals. And I'm like, that's so heartbreaking to me that even in the medical world, we aren't addressing things. And like, that's why one of my goals is to have 80% of my people stay with me for 5 years or more. And one of the reasons for that goal is because I only know how good I am if I can watch you for years and you get better and better and better and better. If not, if you show up with another injury in 6 months and another injury in a year and then 5 more the next year, I actually haven't done my job very darn well. What do you think? How do we start changing that? How do we start talking about this more as healthcare professionals, getting that out more in our education? What are some of the things that you've seen that you're really trying to help the consumer as well as the healthcare person understand?
From the standpoint of like managing injury and pain, or
Yeah.
yeah, I think going back to like, pain is uniquely personal. How you experience it is like I really encourage clients, like own that, like however like your experience with pain is, like I am just a receiver of what you're describing it to me as, right? So I'm going to do my best to really like hear and trust what you say. And I think sometimes what's unfortunate is sometimes a lot of my clients aren't heard in different, when they maybe seek out help and they're written off. And I've had a lot of people come to me as almost like, hey, Alyssa, I've been to 10 other, professionals and you're my last hope. If not after this, like, I'm just going to have to live in pain for the rest of my life, And so I think knowing that whatever you're feeling and experiencing is your truth, and and it's easy for me to say be confident about it, but I really want people to like know that like that's yours and that's your feeling. And if you feel like your sprained ankle escalated your fever and that's what's made you anxious for the rest of your life, like that's a good inkling. Like whenever clients say like, oh, Alyssa, I think it is blank, insert whatever, like I'm like, they're probably right. And the program that I coach is called Better Expert. And why I called it that is because I truly believe that everyone is an expert in their body. We're just cluttered. We're just cluttered with a ton of like, read this. This is what's happening to you. This is what is occurring. Like, and we're then minimizing our feelings and our experience. And then we get confused. And then again, we grow further detached from what our body's actually trying to communicate to us. So my program is about like, hey, you've lived in your body way longer than I'm going to know you. So educate me, right? Like share with me what you've learned. And I want to sit there and I want to learn as much as I can about your body so I can help you understand it even more. Like get all that information, make sense of it so we can get you to feel better.
I was just on a call yesterday with an app developer and they're talking about, doing a Selfscreen app and really what do I think? And I said, one of the key components is when they test something and like, they're talking about doing like an outline image. And so you would go forward and perform the movement and then it would be like, that was limited. And then I said, then another box should pop up and say, do you think that this is related to what you are experiencing right now? Yes or no. And then allow them to have a free text box. I said, because both sides of the spectrum, people know intuitively their body
They really do.
way better. They'll start telling you things like when you do whole body assessments, all of a sudden it's like, well, I fell out of a window whenever I was 3 years old and shattered my pelvis. Do you think that's related? I'm like, yeah, probably.
Totally. And like a great question I tend to really encourage my students to really explore is what happened before it happened, right? Like what happened before your knee started bothering you, right? And they're like, oh, you know what? Like a week before that, I had a family loss, I had da 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 da, right? Like all these things start to surface, and I'm like, okay, like what if, like in many cases, not all the time, in many cases, pain isn't located to that specific spot, right? Because if it's an action signal, it could be the fact that I call it a threat bucket. Your threat bucket is overflowing with all these other stressors. And at a time like right now, right, there's so much unpredictability. And if the brain thrives on prediction, it's like always starting the day with a higher threat bucket. So if we can conceptualize and understand, like, I just have a lot of stress, and my chatty area that tends to tell me that you need to stop and slow down and like do some self-care is when my knee hurts, right? So you start to educate them from this lens of like, yeah, really empowering them to trust that they are, like you mentioned, just, you guys are pretty intuitive, you know?
So what would you say, we talked about the different spectrum, and I think that there are times when maybe someone can't shut down and listen to their signal. So maybe they are in the middle of a competition weekend. Is there a back-end sequence that they can or should be doing, like at the end of their competitive day? Maybe so for my CrossFit athletes that are competing, sometimes it's 2 to 4 day competitions, 3 to 4 workouts a day. Is there something that they can be doing in that meantime to kind of repair and help their system and regain that trust without like continuing to break it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, I see this a lot with my endurance clients, who endurance athletes have a very fascinating mentality, because essentially their goal is to get better at tolerating pain,
Yep.
right? Where my whole methodology is like, if you have pain, stop, address something, like get curious, right? And so as endurance athletes, it's like you kind of have to coach them in a different way to be like, okay, on a scale of one of my clients, we talk about this. It starts with like a whisper, and then a little chatter, and then a yelling, and then a screaming, like there's like a certain scale that we use.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just about probably getting very familiar with your body. But at some point, I think the honest truth is you are trying to manage discomfort, and you're trying to get that mental resiliency, mental comfort with discomfort, so that you can excel in your specific sport. I think if anything, the best thing you can do is understand how that progression look like leading up to a meet or a match, take a ton of notes. And then after that event is completed, sit down with your coach, look at like, wow, I started to feel back pain in this week. I started to have this happen here. And then you want to start implementing the adequate recovery strategies, whether it's sleep, whether it's food, whether it's meditation, right? So that then the resiliency and hopefully those little chatty points are not as detrimental to the event that they're prepping for.
I love that. There is so much that just comes from once people, what I really think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the mental resiliency that everyone is looking for, whether that is just someone that wants to go to the gym, they want to work out for an hour, they want to leave and they want to feel great and accomplished, or it's someone that wants to really push to the next level, be a professional in their sport, really get their best. That mental resiliency that you're looking for is not won over by shutting down and not listening to your system. Actually, the complete opposite. It is won and continues to grow exponentially by just listening. So you're actually setting yourself back, not pushing yourself forward if you ignore it.
Totally, totally. And it's like so ironic, right? Like a lot of the concepts when it comes to, developing self-compassion or like excelling in your specific sport, it's like sometimes leaning into the discomfort or leaning into the pockets that are a little bit confusing are what actually challenge you and help you grow and move forward. So completely agree on that.
And you talked a little bit about breath work in the beginning. And I think that I love this because I think what you're doing and what the breathwork world is doing and some of these things that are coming in, meditation, it's becoming a lot more commonplace. And I love that. I think it's going to completely change how many records are broken, how long people are able to have professional athletic careers. I think we're going to see a big expansion in the next 10 years, which I think is really cool. And part of that breath work is the understanding of just listening and reconnecting and trusting our system. So can you talk a little bit about the breath work that you teach your clients and how you connect with them?
Yeah. So, I mean, breathing statistically, I think it used to be like 10 to 15,000 breaths a day. Then it moved to like 15 to 20. Now it's like 20 to 24,000 breaths a day. So, as a society, right, we're moving into more of this almost hyperventilation state. So breathing, how I coach it is, number one, how do you breathe, right? Like, because if we're taking in 20,000 reps, right, and you're not utilizing your breathing muscles and you're using all these accessory muscles, I mean, imagine how exhausted you're going to be. Imagine how much you're going to be put in fight or flight, which is going to increase your pain, reduce your resiliency, like all of these things. So it's like getting curious about what's going on right now. But in many cases, when we start to retrain someone how to breathe, it's like, I actually need you to breathe less and with more of a focus on CO2. So, there's a lot of focus on bringing in O2 and like, you need a lot of oxygen. And while that's obviously such a huge fundamental piece, you also need CO2 to help drive the O2 to your muscles. So I do a lot of CO2 breath work with clients. And I use breath work very loosely. I know there's a specific breath work style, but I use breath work as just like how I train clients to breathe.
Yes.
But like one of the one of the most simplest things, which has like consistently had the hugest payoff for clients, is like paper bag breathing. Like I literally force them to trap the CO2. They re-inhale it. And it's like it's like almost like a light switch. I mean, you talked about how fast the nervous system works. It's like so plastic. It's so fast. It's the governing system. It's like you can create drastic change in how you feel and how you move. And it could be as fast as like doing a minute breathing into a bag. So for a lot of us that are breathing so much and so shallow, you're pulling in a ton of O2, which is potentially just getting stuck, right? It's not like we can do more. Like if we were to grab gas and just have it sit in our car, right? Like we're not going to move better, right? It's like you want it to be efficient. So if I can get you to recalibrate the amount of O2 you probably have, and then allow you to pull in a little more CO2, that kind of equilibrium and connectedness really regrounds a lot of people. It takes them out of fight or flight. Usually there's a huge pain reduction principle that happens after they get their body back into like themselves from like just a chemical standpoint of O2 and CO2. Yeah.
I think there's so many pieces of this, and I loved what you said about we're talking about the brain being very plastic, and if you have an injury, if you have something traumatic happen, or even if it's something that you might not even perceive as super traumatic, sometimes your brain perceives it that way. That's what's really cool about what we do, though, too, is because the reverse is also true. Sometimes the simplest things can reprogram your brain and you get exponential results very quickly. Now, some things take more time and tweaking and that kind of stuff. But I do tell all of my clients, I said, as a physical therapist, I said, one of my number one pet peeves is this idea of, okay, 2 to 3 days a week for 4 to 6 weeks and you'll be better. No matter if you have back pain, if you have chronic pain, if you have an ankle sprain, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, who wrote that law? I said, I'm like, I want to give you things that automatically day 1, you feel a difference. And then day 5, a difference. Like, we'll keep growing together. And sometimes like we might spend 2 years together. Sometimes we might spend a week together, depending on like how intense and like how much change your brain needs for your body to feel normal again. Normal. I say that very loosely.
Yeah. Totally. There's like really fascinating like client experiences too, right? Like a client walks in, they've had like chronic pain for like years, right? I do a simple vision drill and they're like, oh, wow, it's gone. And then I'm like, oh my God, do you realize like your pain is gone that you've had for years? And they're like, oh, yeah, I feel better. And so like, meanwhile, I'm like jumping up and down. I'm so excited for them. But like going to what you said, it's like, okay, how long does the brain receive that information and then create the new pathways to then solidify it so that it no longer has to have that pain response? And again, that's so uniquely personal for each person. And it's worth having like someone to oversee that, guide you through that process. One thing that I thought about what you mentioned is like sometimes the smallest thing can create a massive change, or the smallest thing can create like a detriment, like pain or something. And it could come down to something as small as like piercings. It could come down to something as small as little scars that you have, right? That again, the way that your brain is receiving that is either extremely threatening and so it's going to increase a lot of discomfort or pain, or it's going to be like, oh yeah, I can manage that, like that's okay, so yeah.
Have you watched the Goop Lab at all on Netflix?
I have not yet.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So everyone that's watching these ding dang shows, blind dating or whatever, and all these tiger shows, stop watching those. Go watch the Goop Lab because it's a very interesting. They have several episodes that line up with what we're talking about. So they have like some Wim Hof breathing stuff, which is, extreme cold and breath work. They've got a chiropractor that actually does like energy flows over the top of people and all these different things. And I just say that to say people receive information so differently. So some people need a coach. Some people need to be introduced to this in a different way. Some people just like to watch other people experience it and they're like, man, maybe I do have the potential to actually feel good. So it's so interesting. And I just love how the world is evolving, especially when it comes to chronic pain. So we talked a little bit about pain right then and somebody being in pain for years. Walk me through the experience of someone that's dealing with chronic pain, because I think more people are dealing with it than what we realize.
Yeah. And it goes back to kind of that initial conversation of you kind of like a survival mechanism that you might put in place is if you've had so much pain for so long, you just tolerate it, right? You're just kind of like, like I just have lower back pain all the time, and you to some degree develop the mental capacity to manage a lot of discomfort. The hard thing about that is chronic pain clients, they tend to have a really high pain threshold, right? So the things that should like startle them and make them like stop and like take a nap or hydrate or whatever it may be, whatever methodology they need, it has to be really, really loud. Like the pain signal has to be really loud in order for them to interrupt a behavior. So, I've had a handful of chronic pain clients, and I think one thing that, I really feel for them on is that it's either, minimize their movement options. It's altered their personality, right? They tend to become more somber, disengaged. And again, this is all survival, like in your DNA survival strategies, because you are managing so much discomfort every day that it's not going to think about, I want to go take a walk in the sunshine and like go laugh with some friends. It's like, no, literally like keep me inside, keep me safe. So I know the environment is around me is not going to hurt me. And so, yeah, typically some of my chronic pain clients, it's been like something that's happened when they were younger, some sort of fall, some sort of surgery. Brain trauma is like concussions, like those are like really, really severe cases where depending on the type of rehab they had after and how timely it was, they're just in a maybe more sensitive space. And so it could come down to like, I'm not sure with your background if a lot of your clients have gone into like more dental work, like sometimes there's a lot of, so there's, in the teeth and the mouth and the jaw, like that's a huge zone of like, when there's trauma there, it can be interpreted by the brain as being like so traumatic that you're going to experience like a change in how well you breathe, a change in what you experience when you take a walk and it's too windy, right? Like there's just so much feedback that anything that's closer to the brain that you've had trauma, it's going to be potentially more of a like, oh my gosh, like I don't feel as safe. So yeah, chronic pain clients, it's like, I just feel for them because I just love them so much. Number one, it's because they just show up, right? And they have enough hope to seek out help and to show up. And I'm like, that in itself, like, is probably your saving grace right now, and as we heal different parts, we learn to explore them. Maybe they just need someone to listen to them. Yep. Their pain could fluctuate on that specific given day.
I really like working with, a lot of people have this kind of negative stigma towards chronic pain, even like, especially healthcare professionals, like, oh, I don't want to work in chronic pain and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I have had some of the most life-changing experiences for myself as a practitioner with people that are experiencing chronic pain, because what I've found is that 99% of them, they want or they are who we are, like, so they were an athlete or they were somebody that could run outside and take care of their kids and garden and go to a job all day and then come home and cook dinner. And they did everything that everyone else in the external world views as like a normal go-getter day. Congratulations. And now they can't. And they've had this identity kind of taken away from them. And not only that, then like we've taken away, we kind of buried it under the ground. And then unfortunately the healthcare community like just keeps throwing the dirt on the top of it, because we tell them that what they're experiencing isn't true. Just what you were saying about honoring what it is that you're feeling. And I talk to them a lot. They'll say, well, people just say it's in my head. And I love it.
Or I'm crazy, right?
Yes.
Like I've had clients like, oh, they told me I was crazy. And I was like, I am sorry that happened to you, but tell me what's going on. Right. And I've had people just by being heard. And like, this goes for like a lot of people, I would say, not even just chronic pain people. When you feel heard, like how good do you physically feel? Right? Like you're like, wow, I feel huge weight off my shoulders. I feel like nothing's essentially wrong, quote unquote, wrong with me. It's like, oh, okay, I can trust myself. And that is such a huge step in a healing process too.
And I tell people too, I say, I know everyone told you that it's in your head, and it is in your head. It's in your brain. And it's the most complex thing in our entire body that no one understands. And I'm like, and I said, so just like, remember that, like when they say that, all they're telling you is that your brain needs some rewiring. And that's what I'm here to do. And I think that's the same thing for you, right?
Yeah, totally. I think that's such a playful way to like, kind of like take some of the heaviness out of it too. Like they're technically kind of right, but let me educate you on actually the science behind why this is and how we can go about healing it. Right. And so I think that's I should use that too with clients. It's just like a nice, you're right. They're kind of right. Here's why.
Well, and I think it's fun too, because they're going to continue. A lot of them are going to continue on and have interactions with physicians. Now that we have medical records, I love what electronic medical records have done, but it also can be very detrimental to these people that are experiencing chronic pain or psychological issues with chronic pain, because that all stays in their record. And for those people that aren't familiar, the more things that kind of build up in your record, sometimes people don't take people seriously anymore because they see this long list of things and they don't take them seriously. So I also like to, just like you were talking about empowering the person, I like empowering the person to be able to sit there and say, you're 100% right. Thank you. Like it is in my head, it is in my brain, and I want to connect with someone that can help with that. Can you help facilitate that? And
totally.
It allows you to have a better interaction with those healthcare people, and maybe even educate them, because you're going to come at it from a positive vibe rather than
no, I love that. I think that is like, you want to find someone that matches you, right? I think all too often we're like, oh, will this doctor accept me? It's like, no. See if you actually want to work with this doctor.
Yes.
And then pose that question, like you said, like, you're right. Like, can you help me? And that's such a nice open-ended question to ask, in the sense of like, hear what they have to say. And if it doesn't vibe with you, like, that's okay. You can find someone different.
Exactly. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of us. Like, keep looking, scour the internet. You will find Alyssa.
Yeah.
Who will help you. Tell me about what are some of do you think the screen for your clients, the people that you're working with, all the people out there that can benefit from this, what is the biggest first or second action step that they can start taking right now? Is it the screen? Is it connecting with you? Is it educating? Where should they really start on this journey?
And then maybe what is their end goal? Or what kind of person is this?
So let's say that, let's go two people. So let's go athlete first. So lots of injuries over the last year, wants to get back to competitive level, more like that professional level, and is struggling to really make rehab work. Like they feel like every time they go back, there's something else that sets them back and they just can't get a handle on it.
Okay, with that specific person, I think like whenever there's typically like traveling pain, like starts in the shoulder, goes to the hip, then goes to the foot, right? It kind of like moves around the body. if I were to give advice, it typically come down to like, it'd be like a fuel component. Like I would look at like how your breathing mechanics are. So when pain travels, it's not like we talked about, like it's not laying a new foundation, it's putting like a Band-Aid and then it comes back, because typically the fuel is so compromised. So how your fueling body breaks down into not only oxygen and like taking in enough oxygen, utilizing that oxygen, and then glucose. So with the whole like kind of keto and like low carb, I think it's hard to balance that, especially if you have pain, because the brain actually needs glucose to create that neuroplastic change. So where should they start? I think, actually, I would say write a detailed like list of all the injuries you've experienced. Like get really clear on what's been going on with your body. And then I would suggest, like, if you are really stumped, like it's always helpful to have someone else guide you through the conversation who's, an expert in their field that can help you, again, make sense of why these injuries probably all happened. I think you and I as movement professionals, like when we watch someone move, we're like, oh, we can probably predict certain movement patterns, right? Or what was an injury, like, it's just the amount of reps we've received on watching someone walk, watching someone move through a different pattern. And it's like, we've developed that skill set of being like, oh, boom, boom, it's that and that, and imagine, right? You hire someone and you get almost immediate feedback. Like, oh, that's the same way as like being heard, right? You just like, wow, someone hears my body and I feel so much relief from understanding that it's not my fault essentially with the pain patterns I've had. It's like literally potentially an interpretation by the brain, and that's all plastic and that can all be changed.
Huge. And I kind of think that goes, I would say what you just said is for anyone. Even if I would have said a chronic pain person, writing a detailed report and getting with somebody. And I think, and I don't know if this is true for you, but I tell everyone, I said, worst case scenario, you show up, we work together, we assess you, you give me 2 weeks of your life. There's 52 in a year, and you see no results. Then we both part our ways and we don't align. Best case scenario is that someone like you, Alyssa, you work with them, they see change, they feel empowered, and now it opens up this floodgate of potential, and they know they're in the right place and they can keep diving in, keep learning. And when we talk about this brain-based model, it seems huge, but it really comes down to very simple things like what you've talked about, and I think that's huge.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell people, what are your goals for the future? Talk a little bit more about your business, your programs, how people can work with you.
Yeah. So before we got on this, I was telling you about my online coaching program. So it is Brainbased. It's a 12-week course and it's very heavy on the curriculum. They often say like the programs that you develop are things that you wish were around when you were struggling through your own personal, obstacles and things like that. So when I was trying to understand my pain, have a better relationship with my body, understand how to eat for my body, how to move for it, I was left with big gaps. I was like, okay, I guess I'll do this, and I guess I'll do Olympic lifting. And, I just kind of jumped into things, but I wasn't self-assessing and getting curious with what I actually wanted to do and needed. So it's called Better Expert. Again, like we talked about, it's like honoring that you are an expert in your body, and I get to meet you there, and I get to explore that with you and refine that expertise. So it's built on 3 pillars. We look at the brain-based movement. So I actually teach you how to conduct your own brain-based assessments. There's a whole protocol and a formula where you then are getting empowered to become an assessment expert of your own body through PDFs, worksheets, videos. And so you learn how to self-assess from a very rooted scientific way, so that if and when, like I think a big question people end up asking is like, oh, what should I do today if I didn't sleep well? What should I do today if I, feel sore? Like there's all these like questions that end up popping up. But what if you had an assessment process that could output some sort of data and you knew exactly what was going to be best for your body? And so the movement piece is really honed in on that education. And then you have a whole library of movements that for me are like should be ironed out and set the foundation for any movement you do decide to do beyond that. Because if you can move in these, I think there's about 50 videos, if you can iron out these 50 ways to move your body, when you go out for a run, when you decide to go rock climbing, whatever you decide to do, your body's going to know how to move that way because of the movement maps are so clear. You have that prediction. The program also goes into nutrition. So exploring, again, actually how to eat for your body. I often tell clients like intuitive eating is like this super like hot topic, but a lot of us are like, I would love to know what to eat for my body, but where do I start? How do I get there? And so I break it down into like my 5 fundamental like steps to get from that sounds really cool to intuitive eat to being like, I actually understand at the root what my body needs. And it goes down to things like, you should enjoy what you eat. You should honor cravings and what's the science behind why you crave X, Y, and Z. And then the last piece is, again, the mindset. So one thing that I've realized is, there's a lot of information out there. It can make us feel very confused, alone, like something's wrong with us. And we end up bringing with us some limiting beliefs, some narratives that don't serve us. So part of the mindfulness course is really exploring like, what are your core values? What are beliefs that aren't serving you? And how do we go about like reframing a lot of that? And then creating the plastic change through the movements we do so that you can be more compassionate, understanding, and thrive in your life in a way that's like very much so aligned with what matters to you. So so that's kind of the premise of the course that I've created. I'm super excited because the last group that ended, it was such a phenomenal group of women. And it just is, it's like so special to see connection being formed between them, to see them draw their own conclusions, to make better sense of pain, to succeed with me giving them a platform and a framework. But you guys are, they're doing the work, right? Like, While I appreciate the thank yous and I'm so grateful to like be in this course, like you guys are doing the work, and I want that to be celebrated.
I love that. If you guys are not jumping up and down right now, you should be. This is about empowerment of your body, empowerment of your mind, empowerment of your whole self. Like when you start locking that crap in, it is just literally like the emoji with the brain exploding. That is how I feel right now, because what we've talked about here is about unlocking human potential in a way that, I'm sorry, Google is not going to help you. So
it'll give you a lot of results, but that can be just overwhelming. So
find somebody, work with somebody. Like it can be, again, kind of like what we talked about, 1 week, 2 week, 12 weeks could potentially alter your entire life. The way that you help your partners, the way you help your friends, the way that you coach others, all of these things, you're going to start seeing movement in the world and how the human body works differently. That's why Alyssa talks about it being an expert, because it's empowering you to become that expert. And I think Alyssa and I definitely match up on that aspect. Like if we can empower others to really see and change the way we talk about our bodies, man, we can create a world of change. Alyssa, where can they find you at?
So my website is www.coachalysachang.com. And then my Instagram is Coach Alyssa Chang. And then I do have a community Facebook group or Facebook business page, Coach Alyssa Chang. And then there is an option to join my private group right on that page as well.
Awesome. I will link all of that up in the show notes as well. And so that way everyone can see that. And I end every podcast the same way, which is, first of all, thank you so much. I am so grateful to connect with other people in the world that are truly changing how people view their bodies. I continue to feel inspired by you and what you're doing and your impact on communities. So I am just honored to have you on the show. And I just thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
And also I end with, if you could give one piece of advice to people that you really believe would change their life, what would that one piece of advice be?
Ooh, okay. It's so funny. Podcast ending questions. I'm always like, oh my God, are they going to make me tell them something funny? Like, I never know what they're going to ask me. So, that could change their life. I think it goes back to like what you and I spent a lot of time on and, talking about, which is, you've been in your body for so many years. You've experienced what it's been like when it was sick, how it recovered, when you felt anxious and what happened, like there's all these little notes that you've gathered throughout the years. And I think it would be that, you are like the expert, like I mentioned, in your body. You have a lot of data, you have a lot of notes. And my leading piece would be that all of the notes that you've gathered have been ways that your brain has tried to keep you alive and tried to work with you. Because I think oftentimes when looking at our relationships with our bodies, we can get really frustrated. Like, why is she not, improving? Why am I not getting stronger, et cetera, et cetera? And she is always working for you in ways that may not be obvious just yet, or maybe a little confusing, but her main goal is to keep you alive, and she'll do anything and everything possible to do that. So I hope it's reassuring to know that you are the expert and she's always working with you.
I love that. Well, thank you, Alyssa, for all of your expertise today. And I cannot wait to connect. Thank you, mobility athletes, for listening, having your mind blown. And don't forget that today your best is enough.